Welcome to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. And now here's your host, Wade T. Lightheart.
Want awesome health? How about doubling your energy? With our free Awesome Health course, you can get a new video and lesson every single day for 84 straight days. The course covers everything from optimizing your digestion, nutrient intake, correct health issues, including weight, skin, energy, immune system, and so much more. The course could easily be worth $200 or $300 for, and yet it's 100% free when you go to bioptimizer.com. That's bioptimizers.com. Once you're there, just enter your name and email to get the first 3 phases of the Bioptimization report. You'll get the report immediately and begin getting your video lessons each and every day from there on in.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Wade T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. And we are going to be talking about TRIPP. In fact, I've just been on one, and it's a virtual digital trip that we are going to explore today because this is the future of, I would say, human experience. And so today we have Nanea, who is joining us from TRIPP, and she's going to speak about the future of mental health care, how psychedelic assisted therapy is supporting this, and how technology-based resources like TRIPP are pioneering a new way for anyone struggling with mental health to manage their stress from the psychological safety and comfort of their own home. Now, a little bit of background on Nanea. She is the CEO of TRIPP, brings over 15 years of experience in digital distribution, video game technologies, and mobile application development. Prior to co-founding TRIPP, Nanea was president and COO of Text Plus, one of the top mobile communication applications on the iOS and Android platforms. Nanea was also the senior vice president and COO of Global Online at EA Games. Through her leadership at these previous companies, she's facilitated, $1.6 billion in exits. And as a lifelong practitioner of meditation, with extensive video game and software development experience, Nanea created TRIPP to help people take control of their mental health through interactive, immersive experiences that combined gameplay mechanics, mindfulness structures, and psychedelic-inspired environments. Users are guided into powerful, awe-inspiring, transformative states. She believes her love of video games, together with a lifelong meditation practice, has changed the course of her life and wants to share this gift with the world. I've just went on a, 7-minute trip?
7 minutes.
And it was a trip. And I've been on a few trips. This was a totally different trip. And we're going to talk about this trip right now. Nanea, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Wade. And just to clarify, my name is Hawaiian, so it's pronounced Nanea.
Nanea.
Yes, so
okay.
That's the trick to Hawaii, is pronounce the E's like A's and pronounce every vowel.
Nanea.
Yeah, so you will
we
crush it.
We had a discussion beforehand. Was it Narnia, Nanea, Nanea? So
Narnia I've heard before, too.
Okay, so let's do Nanea.
Nanea. It means peacefulness and serenity in Hawaiian, and so I think it started off being wishful thinking on my parents' part, but now I'm selling it. So,
what part of Hawaii are you from?
Honolulu.
Oh, right from
Honolulu.
Yeah.
And the Reeves family in Hawaii is one of the biggest families there, so it was impossible for me to get into any kind of trouble.
It's a very interesting culture.
Yeah, it is.
One of my dear friends who just passed a couple of weeks ago.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, was born in Hawaii and grew up there, and he's explained a lot of the nuances of the culture to me, and it's a very interesting culture that I think a lot of people in America don't fully. They kind of think, oh, Hawaii is someplace I go on a vacation, but
Right.
there's a deep historical aspect to the culture.
There is, and I am multi-ethnic, which is common in Hawaii.
Yes.
A lot of us are all very mixed. I'm Hawaiian, Chinese, Irish, and Welsh. And so I often felt as a kid, maybe I wasn't Hawaiian enough for my family, they're very militant, very much into the sovereignty movement there of Hawaiian independence, and then on my mother's side of the family, that's very waspy, and I was never quite white enough for them. So that mix, it's an interesting conversation. I don't think a lot of people have had.
I think ethnicity and the coming from Canada, it's very well embraced there. It's kind of like no one thinks of themselves as just a straight Canadian. It's like, are you a French Canadian, or are you an Irish Canadian, or are you a Chinese, Japanese Canadian, whatever? Like and
then there's Newfoundland.
Right. Hey, bye. So it's actually baked into the culture to describe what is the historical aspect. And
Hawaiian's very much like that.
Is it really?
Yeah, because it's such a melting pot, but everybody kind of tribes up everywhere. And but I also think, it's an interesting history. The ancestral draw there is really strong. They're very spiritual people. They care about family and family ties, the relationship to the land, much more important than consuming and money. And so I'm glad I have that foundation. I think a lot of it influences what motivates me, and I'm very grateful for it. But where I found, as a kid interested in science and tech and more innovation kind of thinking, I found it a little stifling for me with those interests there, because change has screwed over the Hawaiians a lot, and so they're very resistant to it, like a lot of indigenous cultures can be. And so it's definitely been very influential, though, on how I feel connected to the world around me, for sure.
So tell me a little bit about your journey. How does a girl living in Hawaii, connected to the land and the culture, end up in Silicon Valley and these big digital company offerings and things like that, and video games and things like that? So what was that journey like for you? How did you get into that?
Well, it was a bumpy start. My mother was a heroin addict.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so, and as the oldest child, kids in that kind of environment, they tend to really take on a lot of responsibility, and even a lot of blame for thinking maybe they could be better and it would fix this problem.
Sure. And that's much deeper than goes on the conscious level. I think it's an unconscious driver.
It took me many years to unravel the impact of that. And I had two younger sisters, and I think a lot of my leadership qualities probably really stem from being a little girl trying to figure out how to do hard things. And and I've learned how to use it as a strength, but as a kid, especially, I think my sister Vicky, who I lost in 2012 to a drug overdose, she went down that same path. She really couldn't get out of that damage, and I think that a lot of the healing modalities that are emerging now, she would have really benefited from had she been, able to get access to them a lot more quickly. But for me, when video games hit in the arcades,
your first video game?
Well, Asteroids for sure.
Oh, you got I was way back in the Pong days,
I
the black
Pong,
and white TVs.
Yeah,
the little lines going up and down, and then.
I met Nolan Bushnell, who was actually the creator of that, and that was kind of a career highlight to, get to know him.
Was it the Atari Asteroids?
Yeah.
You were just sitting there, you had the little guy in the middle, and you kind of blew those little rocks coming out.
Well, but the thing about Asteroids and all the video games back then, in my mind as a young girl, I was able to identify the pattern. And once you identify the pattern, you can play, for a long time. Yeah. But that's where I sort of put it together. I was starting to understand how it was made. And so this organic interest in technology emerged from really playing video games. And
interesting. So your pattern recognition
that's
capabilities were, kind of baked in to a certain point.
To a certain extent, right? Like I started putting it together, and I think those spatial reasoning skills are really important, especially for girls to develop, when you're young, because that is the key to getting more women in tech.
Right.
It's really, I always encourage them to play video games, and a lot of my friends, their parents, they're concerned about the time spent on these screens, and obviously you don't want an 8-year-old playing Grand Theft Auto. Even no matter how much they want to play it, they should not be playing it. But there are lots of great games out there like Roblox and Minecraft that really get you into this concept of building and making things and seeing yourself as a creator, which are really important to develop that innovation mindset.
You bring up a good point, because I think, there's several different camps on video games. And video games, frankly, is a relatively new conceptual idea to human conditioning. We've had eons of development. And then we have games that, amplify strong aspects or components that will make you successful in life, and ones that probably don't enhance that.
Sure.
I'm just curious, as parents that might have kids or are concerned, because you can't really exclude kids from having video games now and being integrated.
Right.
How would you suggest and this was like really fast into the thing, but it comes up like, how do you designate like what games would be, enhansive for the development of these crucial skills, what ones would be not, and then the time of interaction between video and then non-video world? Have you thought about any of that?
Well, I've looked at some of the research. I know they have tried often to relate video gameplay with real world violence, and they end up like seeing a lot more of the benefits. And what I found as a young person dealing with this challenging environment was when I played video games, I felt in control.
Right.
And there was something about that control that had some psychological benefit. And so when we, started to develop TRIPP, we really thought about this concept of giving people agency and making them feel empowered over their mental and emotional well-being. That, especially, the past year we've all gone through.
Totally.
Having the ability to say, I am opting in to take care of myself is really important. For parents with kids in video games, I think the most important thing first and foremost is to help the child identify, especially if they're going on to online communities where, people are having conversations, how to do that safely. How to identify predators and not make themselves vulnerable, never give your phone number, never give your location, those kind of things. You really have to protect kids just from that first and foremost.
Is there standardized ways to do that? Is there formal stuff?
I'm
totally ignorant.
I was just talking to a woman at Electronic Arts who's spearheading this whole new initiative they have called Positive Play, to really help make these online community environments much safer. So I think the video game industry is really putting some attention on this. You have content moderators, but really the parents need to ensure that kids know, it's kind of like the digital version of stranger danger, right? You really just, you have to kind of get that.
It's a new world to navigate and understand the rules and what is the warnings.
Right, exactly. And I've seen some amazing videos of little girls in Minecraft, like getting, in a conversation with some creepy person and really being able to handle themselves.
That's really cool.
So I think if you can look up some of those things and share them with your kids on, so they can help identify, that's really important. But to address the question of what types of games, I'm a huge fan of these building games where you're building worlds, so Roblox, Minecraft, etc. And a lot of the toolkits in those games look like software tools that you end up, as a computer science graduate really working with. So it's a progressive, incremental learning.
So where did your kind of you had some serious challenges in your childhood that developed this, but then where did you make the jump? How did you go to, was it school?
Yeah.
Was it mentorship? Was there a point where you realized that you wanted to dive further in this? Did you
Well,
accidentally
trial by fire, really. So I had a mental health crisis when I was about 15 or 16, and I ended up in the hospital. And I think it was just the pressure of everything. It broke me, right? And I just didn't have the tools to manage it. And I met a therapist, a wonderful woman, and she had just come back from Nepal and had a meditation practice. And she taught me this Tibetan breathing technique called kumye. I was in a highly agitated state. And it's a simple breath, which you can do it right now, where you just visualize the air coming in through your mouth and your nose at the same time. And it had this immediate calming effect just to pause and do that. And I still do it at moments where I'm uncertain or I'm starting to experience fear. And when she saw that, she just really started leaning into teaching me how to meditate. And this was way before the McMindfulness sort of. I mean, I'm sure there's a service today where I could outsource my mindful minutes, so it'll contribute. Like we call it McMindfulness, right?
Yeah, exactly. Drive through the drive-through.
Yeah, exactly.
Throw that in with my.
And it was something I was embarrassed about. I didn't talk to my friends about it, but I found it to be the game-changing toolkit for me to learn how to pause and start to look at how I was talking to myself, really. It's that inner dialogue that can really drive your decision framework. And I think it can change the course of your life. And so decades long of doing that practice, I really feel it allowed me to see opportunities that would present themselves because I was present. I could see them. And I could start to rewire my decision framework and give myself a different life than what was being handed to me. And I almost feel like my sister's life was the alternate reality version.
Right. Funny you should say that. And I'd like to dive into that a little bit more because I had a near-death experience when I was 22 and had the life review and
was it visual?
Oh yeah. It was the whole 9 years. I experienced
So
divinity, and in front of that divinity, the eternal light, the eternal love, the eternal whatever, I judged myself. It didn't judge me.
So you were a part of it.
I was a part of it, but yet still, there was an interaction from it, but there was a resonance that recognized, and that's where the life review came from, and I experienced everything else. And after I came out of that, I was born again and saw my next life, and then snapped out of it and found myself back in my university room. But what was fascinating about it is I felt like in that timeline I actually did die, but somehow I was able to retain consciousness and jump into an alternative reality of a quantum universe.
So you almost feel like it was a quantum emergence into a different, like a portal.
Yeah, and so there was like I saw the possibility matrix almost like a giant ball.
You formed.
And that line, 22, that ended, but somehow I jumped out onto this other line and was able to continue on with the retention of both, which was kind of interesting. And then, which made me think, and which kind of takes me back to, I want to tie this back to TRIPP.
Well, I want to share, now I definitely want to share the experience we just created for Ram Dass's organization on, it's called Journey. And I'm going to share that with you before I leave.
Which leads me to think, because we're seeing the emergence of, rapid virtual realities and there's the whole singularity conversation that 2030, and I had a lady on here a few weeks ago that was interviewed, and I said, well, how do we know when we've crossed over? And she goes, I don't think we will.
Right.
Which I thought was interesting. But going back to that, how do you see this human experience and how it's connected between the various groups of people or time continuum, because the time and space when I jump in here, after about 30 seconds, 40 seconds.
Yeah,
I'm
you're
in another,
else.
my body is here, but my consciousness is somewhere else.
Right.
And makes one to think, well, the big question of life is where we come from, how do we live, and how do we die? And this idea feels like, well, I'm not that present to my body while I'm in here. And is that the case when one leaves the body? What's your opinion on that?
Well, I mean, I'm certainly not an expert, and you've had an experience I have not had. I definitely have achieved altered states of consciousness through very deep, extensive meditation retreats, and then obviously psychedelic medicines can also shift your attention. What was motivating to me was my late husband was a Tibetan meditator. He had a nonprofit. We spent a lot of time in Tibet working on learning a lot about the Dzogchen meditation practice. And there's a lot of conversation about preparation for death and dying and getting your mind right for that transition, and also an understanding of the veil. That
my understanding is that's the philosophy is that moment of exit determines where you go and what happens next.
Yes,
right?
and the state of mind, right?
Yes.
So my husband was very much focused on making sure he was prepared for that moment. And when he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, he had very specific instructions on how we could only bring joy around him. He didn't want any sadness at all during the last few months of his life. And it was very challenging for all of us because I could see there was this tendency, at least in our Western community, a Western-minded community, to want to make his death about how it was impacting our feelings.
Correct.
And so that was very much a shift to just be present with joy, really accepting of the fact that he was dying and our time was limited and precious, which also made me think, why don't we treat every moment of life like that?
It's, I had the dualistic experience. My sister was 4 years my senior, and she was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease and died at the age of 22. And we went through 4 years, which had a very strong impression on me.
Yeah.
And
how much older was she from you?
4 years.
4 years. So you were very young.
Yeah. So at 14 to 18, literally, I went through that experience. And one of the things that and this is very touching, because everybody around her was kind of in this state of denial or didn't know how to interact with her, which she was aware of. And I recognized that, and I took it upon myself to start having very deep conversations with her about death her experience, which is very powerful if you have an opportunity. But for me, it was formative.
It's incredibly healing for the person who's getting ready to leave as well. And what we did as a family and as a friend community was really just open up the house and allow all those meaningful conversations to happen. And when he did die, I had arranged with hospice to keep his body for 4 days so we could have all the prayers that he wanted read. And it was beautiful. When he left, he and I were looking at each other just like you and I are.
Wow.
And he was fully conscious in his meditation room, surrounded by people who loved him. And I could feel that panic, when I realized, oh my God, it's now. And he was looking at me, and this is where a powerful meditation practice will change your decisions in the moment. I was able to, in that moment, say, do not make the last thing he sees is someone he loves in despair.
Correct.
And so I was able to really be present with him in love and gratitude and express that. And also to let him know that we were going to be okay.
Wow.
Because he needed that information.
Of course, to make that final step and complete surrender into the infinite.
And that moment, I will say, out of all the years we were married, was the most profound moment we had in our relationship. And if I had allowed my emotions to overwhelm me, as they wanted to do, and as, you know, would be very appropriate, I would have actually missed that moment.
You know, so many nurses and doctors who are in hospice care have recognized, like, the profound experience that is around when someone does leave, and how that can be done and initiated so positively. And it's something in the West that we really, we kind of put death in an antiseptic box that we just don't really deal with anymore, and that everybody's taken away and everything's like kind of whisked away and everything's kind of presented where, you know, when I'm traveling, you know, throughout India, for example. I mean, like,
you see bodies everywhere.
Yeah, I was in Varanasi a couple of years ago, and I'm sitting here at the Lassi place, and there's a body going by every 2 minutes, and they're burning them, and the bodies are like,
in Tibet too.
It's very real. It's very intense. It's very raw. And as a Westerner, it's kind of shocking because really that's how it's been throughout.
Well, we're not
history.
used to it. We've sanitized death. And you used to keep Grandpa on the dining room table for a while, you know, people would come and pay respects. And we've cleaned that all up. Keeping Vic for 4 days. You know, we had people come and meditate with his body. He was shrouded. We had the monks coming in, you know, all to his direction. But it was also like this very transitional period for me to release. To really, and to kind of get comfortable in that place. And I think, you know, so much anxiety, so much mental health issues is
today.
Fear of death.
Is at the core underneath everything, and really what it is the loss of control on some level, right? And oftentimes, you know, people's experience in psychedelics, negative experiences are their inability to manage the lack of control that might happen, and people who tend to have positive ones seem to be able to embrace that a little bit better. Well,
I think what I got from that experience was even the power of our meditation practice carried us through a very challenging experience. And on the other side of it, I was alone sitting with my grief. And it was actually beyond my ability to self-regulate, or it was much more immense than I thought. I actually had to reach out and get help and get unstuck from it, you know, because there is a trauma associated with seeing someone you love pass.
Absolutely.
Right? And or just even seeing the pain and the purification process that they go through physically, right, to get ready to leave. But what for me, there was this weird sudden clearing, though, and I realized I had enough success in my career that if I had an idea, it would get supported. And that here I was in this clearing with no one to take care of for the first time in my life other than myself. And I asked myself, what does the company look like that I want to build, that I want to run? And this wacky idea to take video game mechanics and mindfulness structures and see if I could actually shift people's consciousness in a way that took me a long time and a lot of support to get to, but could we use technology in positive, beneficial ways? Like taking all those elements that I found from playing video games as a, you know, troubled teen, and how that made me, you know, have this retreat or this escape where I was in control, I was a hero, I was controlling the universe, you know? And could we take some of those principles but apply it to good? So our goal is not to replicate the psychedelic experience, and we can talk about specifically how we want to work with psychedelics, but to really create these environments where people can go into them and just allow a deeper connection to themselves. And you can see even in the experience that you did, which is designed to bring your attention present, it really does. It really just like shuts down your thinking very quickly.
And I've been a meditator for 20 years.
What kind of practice do you have?
I use through
I'm not judgmental.
Yogananda's Kriya
cool.
meditation.
Excellent.
So I've been a student for 20 years.
Wonderful.
And I've tried a number of different techniques.
Yeah, sure. Everybody kind of finds their path,
that's
right?
my core central component. I was struck by how quickly I dropped into the present moment. And then, and I'm going to speak to this because there was a part of me as I saw myself becoming immersed into this other world. It brought back that thought of the singularity and, oh, is this where people, that you think of the Matrix?
So it's almost like reality shifting.
I felt I am now present in a different reality that's a virtual world. So it was fascinating to witness that come up, and then it's like, oh, I'm really here, and then step beyond that and just immerse myself in it. But there was an awareness that I was crossing the threshold from this realm into that realm.
Oh, that's so interesting.
And then it was like, I'm there.
Right.
And so.
But I wonder if we can use it as a mechanism. I mean, I'm just, blue skying here, but when you talk about kind of you felt at that near-death experience that you had emerged into some different reality.
I'm very conscientious of shifts in my own consciousness. Done a lot of neurofeedback.
Right.
Done a
How do you
host of
measure that?
psychedelic.
I'm super interested in that.
Like in regards to?
Well, the neurofeedback around shifting consciousness.
Okay, so most of the neurofeedback technology will measure the amplitude and the wave which are running within it, and then the concordance. And someone who's experienced interpreting that information can actually witness outside, Bob's going through an experience here,
Well, they see the electrical
They see the
activity.
electricals, or they can kind of see, and then it seems that everybody has kind of like a wave dominance or patterns that are easily, and sometimes that's why I think it's good for people to experiment with different types of meditations. I went to one neurofeedback training, which was very focused on alpha.
Yep.
But
the experience you did has alpha wave sound frequencies in it.
And what was interesting though, when I went to another different one, I was able to. They were driving alpha as their primary driver wave, and my meditation practice was different than that. And I said, I remember having an argument with the neurofeedback practitioner. I said, I know how my meditation is, and when I'm on this feedback device, I'm not able to jump into the same space because the technology is not measuring what I wanted. And then I went to another form, which they could measure my gamma waves and my theta waves and things like. And gamma was very high for me. And as I rode that wave, I had a much more pleasant experience in the neurofeedback. And then now we know that. Research is continuing to expand and there's more possibilities. But what struck me about this, which I think would be phenomenal to integrate with neurofeedback, is the visual component here. Because the ones that, we were subjected to were mostly auditory based. You're in a darkened room or you're in a sensory deprivation of some sort. But here, the speed is so much better because there's so much coming at you from the visual realm, and the breath timing with the lights and stuff is really profound.
Yeah.
Since most of us, I think, are visually driven, or a large percentage, it seems to be easier.
It just gets you a real connection, and those are kind of the things we can do in virtual reality. Instead of, we like to think of it as meditation 2.0 in many ways, because if you think about a concept that people might have of meditation in VR would be, they'll put me in a beach environment and some Celtic voice will tell me to inhale and exhale. But we think about it like, let's just show the person's breath, because you can do that.
Which is amazing.
Right? Let's make it all crystals. And the next layer is to integrate the biofeedback where we're getting the biosignals, whether it can be from new eye tracker lenses that can give us pupil measurement.
Yep.
And integrated sensors on the gasket here.
Yep.
You'll see.
Yep.
You can get galvanic skin response. You can get a really good pulse right above the eyebrows, so you can get heart rate variability. And if we can establish a data model that can feed back to you stress signals and help you be able to change that in real time, you start to build that resilience.
I can see how the speed to integration would be much faster using this than, say, traditional meditative practices, especially today.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip. Supercharge your protein shake. Everyone knows protein shakes are a great way to sneak in extra protein, build more muscle, even replace meals and burn more fat. The problem is the highest quality protein typically absorbs at around 40%. One way to fix this and dramatically increase how quickly and effective your protein shake digests is to add 2 to 3 capsules of masszymes into your shake. One research study showed that pre-digested protein during a meal increased muscle growth significantly. To take advantage of this, just blend the open capsules into your shake, and within 15 minutes or less, the enzymes will have begun to break down the protein into amino acids. This can make your shakes at least 2 to 3 times more potent. Some people do this and sip on their shake while lifting to provide their muscles with a steady stream of amino acids during their workout. To save 10% on masszymes, use the code SHAKE10, that's SHAKE10, at masszymes.com. That's SHAKE10 at masszymes.com.
Because people, meditation practices for the most part were developed a lot of times in like a different time in a different space. And now we have this emerging, technologically driven world, this constant interruptions, this constant electromagnetic frequency.
Right.
Rather than resist it, you're immersing yourself so that well,
and these can be tools too, Wade, right? Like I still meditate, and I think it's important. Oftentimes I'll do TRIPP in the evening because it will decompress me. It gets my mind right, and then it's almost like prepares me for my nighttime practice, which has always been harder for me to jump into than the morning one.
Right.
And so it's a similar thing when we work with psychedelic assisted therapy, and we just acquired a company called PsyAssist, which has a protocol that's been operational in the ketamine psychiatric use cases, and really designed to help prepare you for the session. There's a lot of data that will that doctors understand that if the patient is more receptive and not anxious about the psychedelic experience, it'll actually be more effective. And many people haven't done them before, and so that idea can be very scary. I have a friend of mine who's getting ready to do her first round of treatments ever, and she's never done psychedelics.
Right.
And so, the preparation and onboarding for that, really important. We think tools like this can actually be really helpful.
Oh, I can totally see as it kind of immerses them easily.
While you're fully conscious, and if you get uncomfortable, you can take it off your head and kind of get used to this idea of reality layering or reality augmentation, because in many ways it's an immersive hack, and psychedelics are the ultimate immersive hack.
Yes.
They really take you over. They can shift your consciousness in a way that can be forever life-changing.
And that's what the evidence suggests, depending on what you use and what degree that is. And of course, for many people who are anxiety prone or neurochemically not optimized, psychedelics isn't
or have a lot of damage.
Like psychedelics is too big of a jump, and this would be would it serve as a bridge gap? Do you think? Or?
Yeah, well, I think that we haven't done the scientific research at the scale that we would need to make any kind of recommendation for that. But we are in the process of working with clinics to use TRIPP as a anxiety reducing solution before the session. And so we'll be collecting data for that. I do think that just my personal belief is if anyone like myself who's experienced a lot of trauma, really important to not do any kind of medicine on your own.
Oh, yeah.
The protocol with a very well-trained clinician around supporting someone through psychedelic treatment is really designed, when it's well done, to be very supportive of the patient, make you feel safe. And even what could be called a bad trip can actually be very healing as a mechanism to release that trauma. But if under the wrong set and setting, can actually be harmful, from a point of re-traumatizing someone. So it's really important to approach all of this with care.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, because thanks to the internet and digital information or dissemination, we're seeing much more exposure to the psychedelic world or meditative practice or assisted in combination. However, if you look at the age-old traditions, usually there was, a shaman or practitioner who was trained to deal with the variances that happen from person to person in these type of things, and setting and the ceremony around it, and the music or the sound or the other herbal concoctions that were used to bring people here or bring people there. And if you've been in a really well-run experience, you get to see the mastery that some of these individuals, although they would sometimes people would think they're living in primitive conditions, their awareness about the human psychic condition is in advance of many people who spent their whole lives studying it.
Well,
So
a lot of that comes from a lot of that indigenous mindset that we started this conversation with. I mean, I've had my own experience with that directly with what in Hawaii we have kahunas in our family, and they're the keepers of all the secrets, and and they have I have my one auntie in our family, she is trained in so many herbal medicines that have been passed down, and a lot of just ancestral healing. It's kind of the scientific part of my brain goes, well, where's the evidence behind that, et cetera?
Right.
Because that's just how my mind works. It's very data, logic, focused. But I've seen things happen in some of those environments that are inexplicable. Do you know?
Which is one of the things I believe Rupert Sheldrake has commented about, the importance of spirit and science being merged together, and that operating independently, you miss a big component of it. And I think we're at that intersectionality where we've become so technologically advanced, and the rapid technologization of society I believe requires us to get more in touch into the esoteric or the internal state of consciousness as it is. And I do believe that the technology that you're offering, for example, is probably the easiest and most likely branch for the integration of society, because we've kind of, if we think of, we've moved so quickly, and now we've become an evolutionary pressure on ourselves.
Yeah.
We have the ability to, since the nuclear age, there's a lot of think tanks say, hey, once we hit the nuclear threshold, if you don't rise above it from a certain ethics component, you're going to exterminate life on this planet, or certainly human life for sure.
We can see some evidence of that.
And then we don't know about what the consequences of AI are as of yet. There's one group who can't think it's going to be the greatest thing ever. Another group is saying it's the worst thing ever.
Well, if our response to COVID is any indicator,
it would certainly seem that we've got some lessons to learn.
We've got some work to do on learning how to communicate not only with each other but with ourselves.
Well, I want to touch this because I think it's really important, because what's interesting is there is a track record that's happening in the world of big business where women CEOs are in general more successful than their male counterparts.
Really? Well,
yeah,
we need that news flash to be broadcast.
It's fascinating.
Where do you get that data
well,
from?
Kevin, Mr. Wonderful.
Sure.
He was talking about. He goes, I'm going to say something. They said, what's the most common element that he could see in the success of companies he's invested in? He says, well, you're not going to like this answer. He says, but it's women CEOs.
Oh, wow.
As a woman CEO, what have you noticed in your climb through the ranks, but also maybe what you bring to this world or as an executive that you feel is maybe different, or is there an awareness? Is there something? Is there a je ne sais quoi attitude? Because I think we've been force-fed this Hollywood version of these hard-driving alpha males that are kind of like these hard-battling guys, but yet the evidence is showing that women CEOs are becoming very successful in this world.
Yeah, I think there is some data to that. Companies who had females on the board during the 2008 financial crisis actually recovered more quickly. Some of this narrative around women bring a different mindset, I think in and of itself sometimes can be skewed to be sexist in nature, because there's also this underlying thought that, okay, we're going to be more collaborative, we're going to be more compassionate, but when times get tough, will we make the tough calls, right? And for me, like as a CEO, my approach to business is pretty much the same as a male CEO in the sense that there's certain math around business that doesn't change.
Correct.
Independent of what sex you are, right?
Yep.
You have...
The numbers don't lie.
I don't get different math,
Correct.
right? Sometimes I get held to different standards.
Oh, wow.
Performance standards. So I was just tweeting about something that was a bit cheeky, but there's a young man who is an amazing entrepreneur who I mentor, and we were talking about some of his investor pitches. He's earlier stage than we are. He said, this one investment firm, they told me I needed to get to $1 million in annual recurring revenue before they would be interested in, further in the conversation. And I looked at him, I said, they told me $2 million,
Wow.
And so maybe that's why Mr. Wonderful is seeing that a woman who can get to the CEO position has had to fight and outperform to get to that, which is why it's sort of like a Darwinian natural selection process as well. And I'm not saying that I'm exceptional.
Did you experience that yourself?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So that was a real experience.
Oh, yeah,
for you.
for sure. And then also what I found was rather than... For a long time, I felt victimized by it. I felt suppressed. I felt, I was walking around with not a chip on my shoulder, but a huge, big rock of Gibraltar kind of, boulder on my shoulder.
I'll show you.
Yeah. Well, I felt like there was no way I could win. I was really feeling the oppression of the glass ceiling. And what was that like? Well, it was very defeating, actually, and I felt that that's where really shifting the way that I spoke to myself was really important, where I could start to change the mantras from they never listened to me to, well, if somebody else can do this, so can I.
There you go.
And how am I going to navigate this landscape and play to win, right? Because I wasn't playing to win, so I had to kind of really reach into that gamer in me to go, what's the strategy here? And so for me, I realized that if I got into the data and the analytics, they couldn't argue with the data.
Correct.
They couldn't dismiss my ideas if I came in and said, here's a test I did on this idea that I had, and here are the results. And if you give me X amount of dollars, I believe we can multiply that, and here's the path. So I just became very data-driven, And that really seemed to be the strategy that worked for me to push through a lot of that resistance.
My business partner, who is a data guy, says data drives destinies, and he's very much about a data. If you present him an opinion is one thing. If you give him the data, he's all about that.
Now, if you're crafty, you can use data to support your opinions.
Correct,
too, right?
which I'm aware of.
We see that all over the news nowadays, right?
Let's
cherry
put some
picking
data. Cherry pick it away.
And I always thought it'd be a really funny presentation or even a TED Talk where you could take one data set and tell many different narratives. Many different stories.
Well, we're seeing that play out before our eyes right now in this pandemic response. I mean, depending on what station you turn on, it's a completely different.
Well, and I think that understanding how to dig into data and really look at it can actually protect you from being manipulated by all of that. And you can start to form your own opinions. And that's the same, with your opinion of yourself, your relationship to what you were saying about mystical experience or a deeper connection. It's really a wonderful path to find out what is your version of that. Like, what is the thing that makes you connect to it that's different from maybe the mental models our parents have given us or the communities we've grown up in culturally. That journey to investigate that and define that for yourself, I feel is such a noble path to really, embark upon. And we should, when we think about TRIPP, it's really about how do we help people.
Well, that's a beautiful segue to kind of talk about this, because essentially, the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell's version, and I actually attended a lecture with Jean Houston.
I don't know who that is.
She's a contemporary of
Joseph Campbell?
Joseph Campbell,
oh, wow.
And she wrote a book called The Wizard of Us.
Oh, I like that.
Which was an illustration of how the hero's journey changed with The Wizard of Oz, where it was a feminine hero in that movie, showing different set of characteristics, and it was a fascinating lady. She's just absolutely brilliant, and I saw her lecture in Sedona, Arizona at this thing, and I was absolutely blown away by it. But when we're talking about that hero's journey, it's here we are. Life is kind of ordinary or mundane or not so good, and something bad happens, and the one group is saying we can't do anything about it, let's hide, and then someone goes forward and faces all the obstacles and the competition and eventually overcomes and then comes back and teaches the rest of the villagers. But all of our journeys to self-actualization, if I want to use that word, or let's say to the development of characteristics or skills or abilities, or to move out of social economic status or gender stereotype or whatever it happens to be, is going to involve that journey where you need to
100%.
First identify what you believe to be true, generally by your environmental conditioning, and what you would like to happen, and then implementing strategies. And it would seem that something like this is a perfect segue into teaching people.
Yeah,
First off, I'm struck by how quickly I was able to alter from this plane to another dimension. Boom, I'm there.
I'm excited about developing a concept that you just inspired, which is to create an environment that encourages you to visualize the reality you want to emerge into.
Yeah, exactly.
And so if we could be that bridge to kind of create that, so that you're asking yourself in the experience, we're not telling you.
Yes.
It's really more about creating the little triggers that might help you answer the question. So after my husband died, I decided I was going to start to do all the things I used to make fun of as kind of an ex-punk rocker. So
I love it.
I made a vision board, and TRIPP was on there. And a friend of mine who I had worked with at a mobile game company, he was the general counsel there, he called me up and he said, look, I know what you're going to say, but I just want you to really think about this. I would think you should go to Burning Man. I think it would be good for you. And I went, Burning Man? Like, no, right? And he just like kept on it. And then I thought, you know what, I'm going to do something that I have all this preconceived ideas about and just go. And so I did all the preparation as if I were like a big Burning Man dork. Mm-hmm. I just said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going all in. Mm-hmm. We went together. He got me into one of the, oldest, most well-respected camps, to get the true experience. And there was this moment when I got there that I realized, first of all, it wasn't at all what I thought it would be. And I realized like I had not allowed myself ever in my life just to be present in the way that I was there. Wow. Riding a bike with people I had just met, like looking at art in some outfit that I had put together creatively. And I thought, have I ever had like this feeling of fun before? And, being grown and thinking about that, and I thought, how many other amazing experiences my judgment kept me away from?
Ooh, there's a statement.
Yeah, and it was kind of this sadness overwhelmed me, and then it was just kind of this opening for me to just look at the experiences that were unfolding, because that is what Burning Man is really about. You just kind of go with whatever occurs in the moment and look at the opportunities as they present themselves. And I walked away from that experience thinking, why don't I allow myself to see what would happen if I just were mindfully aware in the present moment and see where the universe wants me to go as opposed to just having a plan. And that's where the idea showed up for this. It was like, you should build something that is kind of your thing, that's a real contribution.
So let's talk about that. Let's get into it, because we've taken a roundabout way with this.
But this is such a good conversation.
Yeah, I really love it.
I hope your audience.
This is well, it's a trip.
Yeah.
And having been initiated here, so tell me about this device. How does it work? Why did you design it?
Yeah.
And where are you hoping to take this?
So this is an Oculus Quest device, and we're platform agnostic. We work on all the devices. I just stick our logo on there because,
branding is everything, right?
I was a very early investor in Oculus. I was friends with the founding team, and that was actually what got me interested in VR. Looking at the early prototypes of it, and really seeing like, wow, this feels really cool to move in and out of.
I had my first experience with my business partner last Christmas. Not the one that went by, but the previous one. I had never used any of this device. Mm-hmm. He put me on it, and it was a game where you had to jump and everything.
Right.
And I went for it and was so immersed, and I'm an athletic guy.
Yeah.
I came out of it, and when I took the headset off, I was in shock of how gassed I was, because I was so immersed, I was not consciously aware of the intensity of the effort that I was going. And
well, the physical fitness programs in VR are actually amazing.
Yeah, Dana White was talking about this in the UFC app and stuff like that. So there's some real potential benefits here on the physical side.
And we want to be the mind version of that and the emotional well-being version of it. And so one of the things we did was, we thought, let's create environments that immediately make you, when you get into them, go, oh, wow, almost like a cathedral, like a cosmic cathedral.
Well, it's very Avatar-ish.
Yeah.
I would say I felt like I was in the Avatar movie to the next level.
Yeah,
right?
well, why not, right?
Yeah.
Why do we want to spend all this time recreating an environment you can already have?
Create a whole new world.
We want to create experiences that are designed with sound and visuals in a way, and soon we'll be able to integrate more haptic feedback as well. I think that's a really big part of getting you that full body immersion, that feeling of real immersion. but with that, we started to think, wow, it's so interesting. Like you saw in one part, you could feel yourself, it almost felt like you're floating up.
Correct.
Or moving forward, even though you're
Yes.
sitting still.
Yes.
Those are kind of some of the hacks you can do in VR that we're exploring even more. Like, how do we combine sound and spatial audio in ways that make you feel like your consciousness is expanding, and really the next phase of development will be to incorporate biosignals that our environment will adapt to. So if we, sense a feeling of stress, whether it's through quickened breath, pupil change, heart rate variability, can we give you that feedback with color palette changes?
Right.
So you're starting to learn like what's happening.
Feedback, like the quicker you can give a feedback loop, the quicker you can make alterations.
Right, and also planting seeds of information that might be more supportive or positive reinforcement. Right now it's generic, right? We can. But eventually our goal is, can we adapt it so it's specific to Wade? We're starting to understand now with almost 3 million sessions where we've been collecting mood data. We ask you how you feel at the beginning and the end of every experience. It's self-reported data, but at the scale that we have it, it's actually really informative because we start to understand, men seem to like experiences where they're out in space more, where women like these more terrain-focused environments.
Wow.
And then we could see how that might change, different times of day. And this is where I think technology can start to add more to basically, the way we use meditation apps right now. We listen to a file. An audio file speaking to us.
As opposed to being more dynamic based on the feedback that you're providing.
And reactive. So I'm going to share an experience with you when we're done that we created for Ram Dass's organization. And it's an homage to his first psilocybin trip. It's not trying to replicate it, but more incorporates his thoughts about it and the experience that he had with kind of feeling like at one with everything, being awareness itself, kind of what you were explaining with your near-death experience. But when you see it, you'll see his identity in it, you'll hear his voice. And imagine a version where we will have a mobile app, which we have, where you can upload your own identity into it and even record your own voice to be your own guide.
And from a hypnotic perspective, if you can do your own voice and neurolinguistic program, it's the most effective.
Right.
And because oftentimes people hear a voice in their head anyway.
Yes.
And so if you're taking yourself through that, and I think what's fascinating about this is, and I love this idea because now, or what you're moving towards is that you can literally start to gauge what's going inside people's heads, if you so to speak, or inside their body from a response stuff. So oftentimes language doesn't necessarily communicate, and if you're articulate and really good with language, oftentimes you can communicate in an effective way of what's happening or what's going on or how I'm reporting things.
Right.
But people, I would think, that maybe have more challenges around expressing themselves or anxiety based might not feel that their words can communicate, but the technology could feed them response mechanisms so that they could what's the response? Modulate their feelings or their responses and then feel a sense of control without having to language it out.
Yes. One thing you made me think about, though, and it's obviously something I think about a lot, is the ability to do harm as well, because somebody gets so relaxed and open. We want to be very conscientious about how we collect data, how we adapt to the person. It's one of the reasons why I haven't allowed advertising into the product, because I just feel that there's a certain amount of trust that needs to occur to create that psychological safety, which in and of itself is really, I feel, one of the most, for lack of a better term, healing use cases.
Set and setting,
Yeah,
right? And the responsibility
There's huge responsibility around the
Yes.
data collection and the privacy, et cetera. It's one of the reasons why we haven't crossed over into integrating a lot of the biometric data collection, because we're still a small company. We don't want to do something stupid, even with the best intentions.
which can happen.
Yes, it can happen.
And this is, as we're moving into this world where your personal data, genetics, biometrics, are now fusing together with your economic reality, and then advertising and locate. Like, I think we're on the precipice of just a radical new world.
I think it's one of the major technology evolutions about to happen, which is we've been walking around looking with our heads down at this small computer.
Yes.
And this is just the beginning of that shift of it moving to the head. And that's going to drive a tremendous amount of innovation, good and bad, right? When you think about what this has done to advertising and the constant stream of information, imagine it here, and then you're integrating biometric data collection.
And then you get into haptic stuff and everything else. Now we're getting into...
And you've got 5G networks making, because a lot of the computing is happening right here. That's why it's a little heavy on the front. But eventually we'll be able to offload this to the operators' 5G networks on the edge. We're working very closely right now in a program with T-Mobile. They have they have the only nationwide 5G network. And what that will do is allow a much lighter weight device to sit on your head, because all the computing will be up in the cloud. And you'll be able to, in very quick transactions, update the experience in real time. That confluence of computing moving to the head, computing moving to the edge, processing, is going to drive so much innovation that our heads are going to explode.
Yeah, and they start adding
And then you add
self-driving vehicles and robotics and virtual reality.
Yeah.
And we're seeing this come up. So where does TRIPP fit into this emerging new world?
Well, I believe, and we do have the largest XR wellness audience, and XR being virtual reality, augmented reality. It's kind of the umbrella for these reality layering technologies.
Right.
TRIPP, it has the largest audience, being on the Oculus Quest and the PlayStation VR devices. We just launched our very first catalog of augmented reality experiences on the Nreal smart glasses. I should have brought them. They're the first real, I think, viable consumer device for augmented reality. And you're going to see many more come to market over the next 18 months. In many ways, it'll look like the very early days of mobile, when you had a Nokia flip phone, you had a Motorola Razr.
Yeah.
There were like 100,000 different types of devices before it kind of standardized, with Android and iOS. We're still in that very early stage where everyone's...
Peter Thiel's 0 to 1 principle will win out.
Yes.
Right? where somebody just through...
or maybe 2 or 3.
Through technology, market penetration, and good, business practices will end up becoming the dominant.
So we are very committed to being on every device, being the wellness application for people to support their emotional and mental well-being. And we will do that in consumers, because we really do believe in empowering you, the individual, with that toolkit. Even when you're going through professional, seeking professional help and getting it, we want to be a digital supplement for that. And we will work very collaboratively with the psychiatric community the psychedelic therapeutic community as well. And we have now that capability in-house with the Psyassist acquisition. Sunny Strasberg, who is our new director of clinical operations, she's an EMDR therapist. So think about doing EMDR, the eye movement with eye tracker lenses, right, in VR, and it's very precise.
Wow.
And we can track it to your eyes. Like, that is something you will see us start to explore.
Well, we know this is changing sports performance right now, as a lot of high-end sports athletes are using eye tracking.
They use TRIPP too.
Yeah, and they use this stuff and the results. I remember in the NHL, they started using this for goalies.
Oh, really? My cousin.
To create efficiency in eye tracking for goaltenders. And there was a bunch of what were considered second string goalies that in a very short period of time became starters in the league.
No kidding.
Yeah, because they were able to reduce the chatter and energy exerted.
Well, that would apply to soccer, to football too, right?
Anything that involved tracking. And so you could get better, more efficient patterns of tracking the movement of the puck, which is an essential component of a goaltender.
Well, and with EMDR, there's the impact on trauma and trauma treatment. There's a lot of exciting work in that field. Therapists working on it. So I'm excited about that, and creating sort of these interfaces to giving people tools, right? Like, I think that mental health is just health. We should drop the mental. Right? It's health. Yeah. Nobody can have a physically healthy body without understanding when their mind's not healthy, how that affects them physically, and vice versa. We can see microbiome imbalances really creating states that are depressed.
Well, we're very much on the cutting edge of that development and the microbiome.
Well, I can see everything you have all around you.
Yeah.
And thank you for the gift box that you sent. Yeah, I've been taking it with every meal.
Oh, good. Well, cognitive performance has both a biological as well as an electrical component, and then there's the imprinting of experiential reality and how that impacts. So, how does TRIPP maybe help people with challenging conditions or mental health issues?
Yeah, we don't make any therapeutic claims.
We understand that. But
we are in clinical studies in the area, and I can talk to you specifically about what the clinical trials we have. So in addiction recovery, we have received a grant from the National Institute of Drug Abuse. We finished phase 1. It's getting ready to be published. We're embarking on phase 2. And the use case is very interesting. We onboard the patients in treatment, so they use it when they feel triggered. Yeah. And instead of acting on that craving, going into an environment where they can learn to sit with it and work through it, really that muscle is key to being successful in early addiction recovery.
Oh, absolutely.
And there's a reason why even in 12-step programs, meditation is a part of one of the steps, the 11th step, because even back in 1938, which was a revolutionary concept, the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous understood that you must have that capability, or it's a condition for success. So we are now exploring the evidence through that research to see how that might have an impact on reducing relapse rates when they're released from treatment during that first 6 weeks, where they're the most vulnerable to relapse as well as overdose, which my sister, experienced. Because with fentanyl in the ecosystem now, you're very vulnerable. Yeah. And the ability to overdose is, it's increased significantly with fentanyl in the...
Yeah, it's become a dangerous world.
It's very dangerous. I just had an old boss of mine who I've worked for several times during the pandemic lose his 18-year-old son to an overdose. And this was a kid I, saw when he was an infant, watched him grow up, had everything going for him, unlike the environment I grew up in, and still, was vulnerable during the pandemic, and, probably wasn't wouldn't, without fentanyl in the mix, probably would still be here. Yeah. So, we're here, all these tragedies. The other thing we're working on is we have an exciting study up and running with the New York Office of Mental Health with the severely mentally ill. They're using our experience to see if it can help with the reduction of aggressive behaviors.
Wow.
And that they saw early on a reduction in the need to medicate. So that is really huge, right?
That's great.
Especially in that environment, they don't have to be restrained as frequently. And so that study now is moving into phase 2, and I'm excited about that because those are kind of the use cases that, we could see clinical offerings, more therapeutic, targeted interventions downstream.
And then, so for someone such as myself that says, hey, this is really cool, I'd like to use this as an augmentation to my current meditative practices.
Yeah.
Like, how do I get these?
Yeah, you can buy an Oculus Quest, and I highly recommend them. And there are other devices, too, that are great out there. It's only $299, so it's one of the best priced devices on the market. There's a lot of fun games and fitness applications as well as TRIPP. You can download TRIPP. It's a free demo experience, and then you can subscribe monthly or annually, and very low cost. We're not even as expensive as some of the meditation apps that people are subscribed to. And then our goal is, can we get the clinical side of our business eventually operating at a level where we can keep the costs low on TRIPP to have the greatest impact?
That's super cool. Now, I've got to ask the question.
Sure.
And that is, interactions with psychedelics and TRIPP. Are they playing around with this?
I've seen some subreddits that have talked about it. I mean, it's definitely an off-label use.
Yeah.
We will be working very directly with that therapeutic community, and already are starting to embark on that journey. So I think
I know there's a lot of funding going in that
there
right
is.
now.
A lot of our new
Tim Ferriss
investors
has been spearheading a lot of that with his own experience, because I think psychedelics really helped him with his own stage of depression.
Yeah,
that he said in his podcast.
he really made a huge contribution to getting the study Center for Psychedelics and Consciousness at Johns Hopkins.
Yeah.
Which, there's a very interesting study that you might really identify with, that one of the researchers there, Matthew Johnson, had identified what they believed is the mechanism for why psilocybin seems to have the effect it is, which is a perceived connection to a mystical experience. So similar to that shift you had with that near-death experience. And I think one thing that really strikes me with your description of that is that sense of who you are in relation to the divine or that mystical connection or entity.
Well, funny as, that was when I was 22. And now
Has it changed now?
Oh, yeah. I've had 20 years of meditation and numerous mystical states. I sometimes joke with my friends that I'm like a spiritual trust fund baby. That I've inherited a vast array of mystical experiences, and I don't think it's commensurate with the amount of effort I put forth in this life.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And, that has evolved with my own practice, my own experiences, and I've done all sorts of different psychedelics. Some not supervised, some under, well-versed supervision. And my experience and understanding and comprehension, I think, has shifted somewhat. And where in that first experience, there was a separation between myself and the divinity in that first initial experience. There was a clear distinction between me and it. In more recent experiences, the understanding that
it's more of a confluence.
Yeah, and that what I consider my life was actually the illusion, that I was never really separate at any point, at any time.
And that's a very big Buddhist concept too, I think.
That was something I had read about, studied about, learned about, but has become an experiential reality now, which is disconcerting. The first time that happens, when you like, and that's my next question, is on several different occasions, and some of these were initiated through pure neurofeedback. Some were initiated just in meditation, and some were initiated through psychedelics. So I've had different gateways into interdimensionary experience or non-linear experience, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And what do you feel is maybe the potential opening that this type of tech can provide people? Because there's certainly a safety mechanism in some ways that it was easier.
Yeah, because you have agency, you know that if it gets uncomfortable, you can take it off your head.
Correct.
And so
where psychedelics, you flip the switch and adios, amigos.
Yeah. And so what I'm excited about is it is kind of its own thing to be fully conscious, but experiencing a different reality, right?
Yes.
And right now, the devices have evolved a lot, but it's still not. I mean, imagine what it's going to be like in 10 years.
This was my first thought when I talked to that little edge that I was as I was going into the TRIPP experience, and the reality of like there was almost an anxiety, which was, oh, this is the singularity, like where I won't be able to tell where my physical ends and my conscious realm. Like I felt myself go through that transition from this world. There's a little hesitation, and I was gone. And largely in part because I haven't used the technology before, so that was my first. Kind of like people, when they're doing a psychedelic and they're coming on.
Yeah,
it's coming on. They're like, oh no, here we go. But maybe the experienced practitioner's like, oh yeah, here I go. You know what I mean? And I suspect as you get more familiar with technology, but I didn't notice that.
Yeah.
And that crossing over into outside of this reality into a new reality.
Well, we want to explore more, and maybe not all of these will get released in the consumer landscape, obviously, because really getting out there with a stress management tool, well needed, right? And if we can give you a respite, especially with what we've gone through with just, and then now we're seeing climate on top of that is definitely going to be another thing that makes us feel like we can't deal with life on life's terms in many ways. We want to create a place where you can go to connect back to what's important to you, a sense of gratitude, and find that inner strength so that we can deal with all of these issues that we're confronting. That is our first goal. But as we work with the therapeutic community and really thinking, how can we create experiences that give you a sense of expanded consciousness? And that's where I want to explore.
Yeah, I'd be very interested in it. Something that just thought to me is like, what would this technology be like inside the prison system?
We have opportunities there for sure.
I think there could be some very remarkable experiences. There's so many different options that could, I've only been.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of. We have had a customer when we were working primarily with enterprise as a wellness solution. We had a very large company that did content moderation for big companies. And content moderation, it's this job, it's a silent workforce that none of us really know about, but we all benefit from it. It's this huge population of people who are viewing the worst content on the internet and training algorithms to detect it so it doesn't show up in our social feeds. And it's a very difficult job. They're looking at just the worst violence, the worst animal cruelty, that kind of stuff is very stressful. And the fact that we were able to help those people, get some relief during their workday was something I was really proud of. And very early on, and also they were one of our first customers. It was that feedback that I needed to know that we were onto something.
Right.
That
you could alleviate some suffering.
Well, and I could see it right away. I had some of the workers there in real time just come up to me and thank me for making this, because of what it had done for them just in their day-to-day. And it's not me. What I want to do is, I'm very grateful that I was able to have an idea and make it, come to reality or virtual reality.
Right.
But also we have a mission at TRIPP to create this group of people, which is, right now we're at 17. We're working with a lot of these new content creators who are starting to approach us to say, I want to use my talents to help you build this.
Yeah.
And so I'm realizing that even just working on this has been so amazing, to think about how do we create a different kind of work experience where people have a sense of purpose, they're engaging with the data that our customers are giving us, or direct communication on how it's affecting them, and how that makes you feel when you show up every day for work. And maybe to answer your question about a female CEO, et cetera, I am a CEO who happens to be a woman, but, and I want to try to build a different kind of company that people who work with us and partner with us feel like we're all part of the force for good.
Funny you should say that, because that's been a driving component of our company, is to end physical suffering and activate biologically optimized health, basically take people from sick to superhuman.
Yeah.
And I can think back to my mom. When I was a little boy, I had sent, I had gotten a bad chocolate bar. And she said, well, what you want to do is you want to write a letter to the company and send the bar back, because companies would like to know.
Yeah, they do.
And so I was a little boy at this time, and I remember writing the little letter and explaining.
How old were you?
Oh, I was maybe 8 years old.
Oh, wow.
Very young.
Wow.
And my mom taught me this. And so we wrote the little letter and we sent this chocolate bar to the company. And I don't know how long it was. It felt like forever, but I remember getting a package from the company. This was in the days of snail mail, no internet and stuff, right? And inside that package was a nice letter from the company that was all printed on fancy paper. And it said to me, thank you for giving us our feedback. We really appreciate it. We've included these 4 chocolate bars for you to have. One was the one that I had, and 3 other ones that I hadn't had. I mean, I knew the chocolate bars, but there wasn't that many that was available at that time. And that changed my life. So in my company, I handle customer service and sales.
We did that all last Christmas.
And, one of the things that I've been conscientious of is, number 1, we give people their money back if it doesn't work. Number 2, we give as much education as possible. And number 3 is we also want to create an environment where people are happy to come to work, and if they fit within the cultural values. And we have extreme ownership, and these type of things, but we also have these other components like be kind and loving. Or
why not? Right?
Well, we spend so much time at work, and so many people identify with work, and the family unit and the community unit has changed so much in a digital world.
Right.
It used to be you lived in your little town and you worked at the factory and you knew everybody at the Women's Institute and there was the county fair. That's the kind of world I grew up in.
Right.
And then now people work online and they are separate from each other, or they live in a city where you don't know your neighbor anymore.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing a redefinition, and I think that the companies that will be successful in the future will be these ones which are driven very much like Gene Hewson said, is that putting forth these community connective-based values, and integrating technology into that, so it's not It's not the what was that? You remember that 1984 commercial with just Steve Jobs? Like that control, which we are on the threshold, I think, of going one way or the other.
Oh, for sure.
And it's nice to know that someone such as yourself is driving on, I would say, a little bit on the heart.
Well, I appreciate that. I do have 3 coaches, because what I am learning through increased self-awareness, that even when you have that, it's still the ability to be unkind by accident is always there, especially as a business owner and an entrepreneur, and you don't realize it, but my awareness in real time to be able to see, oh, this person received that very poorly, I can immediately address it, and also really approach that, because it is a power dynamic that you really have to take responsibility for. When someone else's livelihood is dependent on your decision, you hold that. It makes them very vulnerable. Like they can't, no matter how much you say it's a flat organization, come to me, it's open. They're not going to, right? And so how do I, give feedback in a way that is not damaging? People are going to go home to 2 to 3 people sometimes at the end of the day. So my impact goes beyond those 17 people as well.
It's so true. And I think the bigger and more pressure, the more decisions, the more pressure you have, the easier it is to slip into unconscious about those little interactions.
You pass it down, right? If I'm getting downward pressure, there were times before this recent round of funding that we received where I didn't know how much longer we were going to be able to go, right? And it, being an entrepreneur can be very lonely, and it's easy to attach to fear. So I think that work on self is really important when you want to do difficult things, and that's why I'm never publicly, or even, I try not to be critical of anybody else's effort, even if they're directly competitive to ours, because it's so hard to have an idea and make it happen, that you really have to acknowledge that in and of itself was a noble effort. So
beautifully said.
Thank you.
Where can people find out more about
TRIPP?
Go to
TRIPP.com.
And that's TRIPP?
PP, we just thought it looked cooler with 2 P's. So, TRIPP.com, and we'll get you set up. And you can always email support@TRIPP.com, and we have a great support team that will respond. And I definitely do respond directly to those.
Well, I'm super delighted to play with the technology. Thank you for taking.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And I think it's exciting. There's so much out there that I think, certainly from people in my own age group, that are hesitant or concerned about some people would say is the intrusion of digital technology. But here it's obvious that you're conscientiously using this technology is something that can be very helpful for enhancing the human experience as opposed to taking one out of it. And so I want to commend you for that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
That's really powerful and impactful for me, and I hope it will empower a lot of people.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you to your audience for taking the time to hang in here with us. This amazing conversation.
Well, there you have it, folks. It's all about TRIPP. I'm Way-T Lightheart from Bioptimizers, and I can honestly say that I just had my first experience. It was very powerful. I encourage you to give it a try, and give us your feedback on this. I think this is an exciting, emerging new world, and it will be something that will likely shape our future. So why not get integrated now? It is something that's coming, whether you like it or not. And you know what? It is really fun and really cool. So give it a shot. I'm Way-T from Bioptimizers. We'll see you on the next episode of the Awesome Health Podcast. Thanks.
At Bioptimizers, our mission is to fix digestion. And a cornerstone of digestion is gut flora. P3OM is our patented probiotic formula. In fact, we call it the Navy SEALs of probiotics. You see, strong proteolytic or protein digesting activity is paramount to having a healthy gut flora. And of course, P3OM provides that. The good news is, unlike weaker probiotics, P3OM survives the digestion process. What it does is it basically multiplies the good guys while protecting you against pathogens, or what some people call the bad guys. P3OM really helps to rebuild your digestion. And what that allows you to do is to maximize nutrient uptake, energy, and metabolism. To find out more of how P3OM can help you, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.